Our next session brought to you by our sponsor, Recast. So once again, I just really want to thank Recast. We've got a few sponsors for NWSCUG. We started a sponsor program last year, and so just really want to thank these guys in the spring. I think, Mark, you might have been on our last, let's see, in-person session. I think after you left, the world changed. So really glad to have Recast back, and thank you guys for being able to come on during our online sessions. So I'll hand it over to you.
Excellent, thank you. Let's share my screen real quick. One second, it's the wrong thing. Yeah, hopefully we can turn around the. This time around, Mark will bring better news with the world.
That's right. Thanks, Mark. Yeah.
So thanks everyone for attending, sticking around for the vendor session. My name is Chris Muster, CTO here at Recast. Mark's online as well. He's going to be keeping an eye on the chat to answer any questions that might come up throughout the session. So if you have any questions at any time, feel free to ask them. We'll try to answer those as we're going through stuff here today. For those of you who don't know us, Recast Software, we make a set of right-click tools for Config Manager that are focused around helping sysadmins make sysadmins' day-to-day lives a little bit easier. And when people think about right-click tools, they typically think about us in the terms of our community tools, which are typically thought of as in the terms of our productivity tools, right? Our client actions, client tools, console tools, some other shortcuts around the console, like user actions or content tools. But today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the extra stuff that's in enterprise. We have this enterprise ready concept that we talk about, where we're taking the right-click actions that we do and kind of customizing how they perform in your environment, whether it's through controlling permissions to determine which users have permissions to which right-click actions against certain devices and users, centralized audit logging, that type of thing. But where I think this enterprise ready tier and what it's kind of marketing speak for Recast Management Server secretly, but where the Recast Management Server really shines is through our routing layer, because it lets you customize where the right-click actions are being run, and that opens up possibilities like running actions against device and user objects or other Active Directory objects in untrusted domains via Recast proxy. It also lets you hit some of the zero trust devices where they're not on a domain, they're workgroup devices via a bit of code that's running on the device, and you can communicate with those either through the very fast communication Recast agent communications channel or through the ConfigMan client's native fast channel communication layer. And because we're able to utilize that fast channel, you can actually run the right-click actions over the cloud management gateway as well. So there's a lot of flexibility that you get when you upgrade to enterprise from Recast Management Server. We're actually not going to talk too much about that today. We're going to do a webinar in 2 weeks or so that's going to cover more of that stuff in depth. So if you're interested in that, go to our website, sign up for the webinar. We'll kind of cover that in more depth there. Today we're going to talk about some of the other bits of this chart. So we have a set of actionable dashboards. This is basically an area on the console where we try to take our development team's years of experience as sysadmins and pinpoint some of the common problem areas that we experienced at our previous organizations and present the data in a way that's easy to understand and easy to take action on. So these are things like making sure all of the devices that you intend to manage are actually being managed in your config environment, or making sure the devices that are under active management are up to your organization's internal compliance standards, whether that's making sure they have lapsed passwords in Active Directory, making sure they're encrypted with the appropriate Bitlocker settings, or making sure the updates are applied to them. We're going to cover a little bit about our automation platform and right-click tool builder and runner. And we call it automation platform, but really in my mind, this is the like the fix the organization specific problem tool, or like the create the easy button for your service desk, where imagine scenarios where your service desk is escalating tickets to you, and maybe you've documented a policy or procedure for fixing an issue on a remote device. This lets you build out an action and present it to them within the config.man console so that they can take action at first call rather than escalating some of those tickets. And then we're going to cover a little bit about our kiosk tools. So we have, kiosks are typically a lower percentage of an organization, but they oftentimes take the majority of effort when it comes to custom configurations, right? These are the kind of the outliers in your configuration environment. So we're going to talk through some of the tools that we created to try to make some of those configurations a little bit easier, and kind of live demo of applying those settings, and so you can see what it looks like when we go roll forward to a kiosk profile and then roll back to a full Windows 10 environment. We already talked about this. If there's time at the end, we'll leave it open for Q&A, and we'll try to answer any questions live. But for now, we're going to jump into the console and start walking through some of the tools. So we're going to start with those dashboards. So here on the Assets Compliance node, we have, under the Recast software node, we have a bunch of dashboards here. And I'm going to start on this Active Directory cleanup tool. And this tool is really about scanning Active Directory and Config Manager and making sure that the data is consistent between the environments, right? Making sure all of the systems that you intend to manage in Active Directory are being managed by Config Manager. And it can be useful for troubleshooting your AD discovery methods as well. So I'm going to hit scan here, and it's going to just show a pie chart of where my devices are in my organization, whether they're in ConfigMan, Active Directory, or both. And as I click through them, I can see all the devices and some properties about those devices in the chart below. And with this tool, what I'm probably most interested in is targeting these devices that are only in Active Directory or only in ConfigMan. If they're only in Active Directory, we probably need to evaluate, well, why aren't these devices getting into Config Manager via discovery, or why aren't they getting a ConfigMan client in general? So, these might be devices where we've just misconfigured our discovery methods, or maybe they're in the wrong OUs in Active Directory. So we can try to fix those. We also have devices that are only in ConfigMan, right? And these are areas where we might need to relitigate, well, why aren't these joined to the domain, right? Is there a reason that we've decided these aren't going to get our group policy, et cetera? So, it's a good time to reevaluate those decisions. And, if we do see older records, like, for example, on this Active Directory tab, these devices had a password last set back in May. So maybe I just don't care about them, and I can actually just go ahead and delete them right from here. Or if I have a more complex decommissioning process, we can actually export all the data to CSV and send it over to our Active Directory team to take care of. So that's the Active Directory cleanup tool. Again, it's about managing or learning what's in your environment because you can't manage what you don't know about. We're going to jump over to LAPS next. And for those of you who aren't familiar with LAPS, LAPS is the local admin password solution. And it's a free tool by Microsoft, and it's a way for you to randomize the local administrator passwords on your devices. Right? One common area for breach is if your shared admin credentials that are the same across all your workstations get leaked, right? Now you have to go and update those in your environment, update those credentials on all workstations in your environment. The LAPS solution kind of solves that problem by making them all random. Every device has a unique password, so even if it leaks, the scope of the problem is limited to a single device. And LAPS will automatically regenerate passwords on a schedule that you determine via group policy. So if it does leak, the time window in which the credentials can be accessed is relatively limited. So it's free. It's definitely something you want to look at deploying in your environment if you haven't already. The LAPS dashboard is really about evaluating the compliance of your LAPS policies once you have that product deployed in your environment. And so there's kind of two sections of this chart. The left section is scanning Active Directory for any devices with and without the LAPS password and reporting devices in each of those states. And again, the charts are all clickable. So if I click on an area in the chart, I can see devices without the LAPS password. And for this, I might sort by the Labs client install state, right? If I have devices that don't have Labs client, it makes sense that they wouldn't have the Labs password in Active Directory. So, I might run a tool to get out there. I'm not sure if those devices on, but as an example, I might run the Remote Software Center tool to go and install the Labs agent on those devices to make sure that they get their passwords updated in Active Directory. So, a couple ways to resolve that, or I could also add them to a collection if I need to get the Labs client deployed to them. Other scenarios that are kind of interesting over here, we see some devices that have the 64-bit Labs client installed, and yet they don't have a password in Active Directory. So this is a good area to spend our troubleshooting time. Well, why isn't the password getting Active Directory? Perhaps those devices don't have permissions on the computer container or on their computer object to write their own password. So again, maybe I don't have permissions to Active Directory. I can export this to a CSV and send it over to my AD team and have them reevaluate the permissions, maybe rerun the Labs permission delegation script against my domain. The right pie chart is all the same data but pivoted on a different view. Right now we're pivoting on this Labs client install column. Right, and when we look at this, sometimes it's useful to sort by password expiration. Right now we have two devices, those same two devices that have the 64-bit client installed but are missing the password. So again, we can take action there. Or devices without any Labs client, we could just select all and run that Software Center tool to get those installed as well. And then this right chart is all coming from Active Directory, or Config Manager hardware inventory. So we see 5 devices without password. These are without the client installed. And these are actually the same devices that from our AD cleanup tool were members of the domain but didn't have a client. So probably some devices that we want to take action on to get the client installed. Some other cool bits about some of our Labs tools. If you suspect that there might have been a breach in your environment, you can actually go ahead and just reset the Labs password in bulk on devices. So I can multi-select devices. I can tell it, well, I want to expire it right now, and go ahead and force a group policy update after expiration, or after I set the Labs policy, to make sure that the devices receive that policy as soon as they're able to. So if I'm concerned about a breach for any reason, I can do that. We also have that same option when you view the Labs password to go ahead and expire it, so that when I as a help desk user give out the Labs password, I can go ahead and say, well, it's only going to be available for a little bit, and after that time, it'll expire itself, so you won't be able to use it again. The next dashboard is in kind of a similar vein, is the Labs dashboards. These are really about evaluating Bitlocker compliance across the organization. Right, so Labs is about making sure your Labs policies were up to date. The Bitlocker dashboards are making sure your Bitlocker keys are stored in the locations you want, and making sure that your devices are up to speed with your MBAM or CM Bitlocker management policies. And so, kind of a similar type of charting scenario. On the left, we have where are our keys stored, right? So we see a couple of options, and we actually have a ton of options here. But in our environment, we see BitLockers without any keys. Here I might sort by my encryption method, and if there are devices that are encrypted but I haven't been able to find BitLocker's keys for, I probably want to take action on those right away. Right, make sure that the keys get back up to CM BitLocker management or MBAM, or if I'm using Active Directory, I can back them up there. Because if the user gets locked out of those devices, there's no guarantee that I can get them back in without that key backed up. We can also see areas where the keys are. So we have 6 devices in this environment that have our keys backed up to CM BitLocker management, and then we have 1 device that has keys in both Active Directory and CM BitLocker management. So I can look up the key in a couple of different ways. These right 2 pie charts are all about compliance. So this MBAM compliance is looking at the MBAM database for what the MBAM server thinks of the devices as far as their compliance with the group policies you've set. So here we don't have an NBAM server, so everything's unknown. But the idea is the same as the CM Bitlocker management. So I'm going to focus more on this dashboard. Here we see we have kind of three states. We have compliant, non-compliant, and unknown. The compliant portion of this are the devices that have received our CM Bitlocker policy and are successfully compliant with all of the things that we've set. Non-compliant are probably the devices we want to look at. Right? We have a bunch of devices that just aren't encrypted. Maybe we need to help them along. So we could launch our Bitlocker status tool, for example, and view the Bitlocker status of these devices, and right-click and maybe add some key protectors and start the encryption process on those devices to make sure that that we're protected. So there's a lot of power in this. Mark actually wrote all these tools, so he knows way more about it than I do. And he's probably cringing at anything I'm missing. The last bit here. Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say not at all.
This is more recent edition. You can actually scan by collection as well. So before we scan by Active Directory, but now you can choose collections and filter that way as well. I think that was in whatever the last release was, 4.3. All right, the last dashboard I'm going to show today is the software update deployment status dashboard, and this is all about making some of the software update dashboards that are natively available on the console more actionable. So you've probably seen something similar to this under the monitoring node, where we've got kind of device compliance status on the left, and then kind of update compliance by category on the right. Where we take it a bit further is we have some of the same checkboxes, right? You can limit to deployed updates and see the pie charts kind of update in real time. You can limit to software update groups. So if I'm only concerned about my workstation updates, I can do that. Or I can limit to updates that are older than a certain age, right? So if Patch Tuesday just happened, I don't really care about the updates that were released yesterday because my machines haven't had time to be compliant. I can send that out a bit to get a more realistic view of my compliance in my environment. And then, lastly, if you don't care about some of these other update definitions, you can actually uncheck them. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you're not compliant with updates, I'd say you got to install any of them, regardless of the classification. But what's cool here is you can actually click on any of the sections of the pie chart and drill in to see more information about the devices, right? So we have a list of devices, their compliance state, but I can actually drill in and see, well, which updates are missing on this device, and get more information about those updates. And if I decide that I really want these updates installed, I can actually right-click and just do the install missing software updates tool to try to get those going right now. And this is kind of equivalent to remoting into the devices, launching Software Center, and checking the box and hitting install. So it's kind of a similar experience, and it's a good way to make sure the updates go right now. I've seen this used a lot, in particular if you're at past orgs. I've seen where they only deploy updates to servers as available, and the server team would remote into boxes and install it. This type of tool would help a lot in that scenario. And kind of the same concept on the right chart. We give you the same data but pivoted into a different view. So you can view the updates by category or classification and get some information about the updates, and then drill in and see which devices are missing a particular update. And if there's something important that your security team has said, hey, we got to get that out right away, you can again launch the install missing software updates tool or remote software center to get those updates installed on the device. So that's concludes the dashboard section. Now we're going to move on to some of the kiosk tools. And all of our kiosk tools are device-based. So I've got a couple of test kiosk devices here that I'm going to target, kiosk 1 and 2. And the first thing we're going to talk through is part of the tool set called Kiosk Manager. And Kiosk Manager is all about managing these profiles, which are basically a bundle of settings that you set up. and deploy to a device. And the goal is to be able to atomically deploy the profile and roll them back really quickly, so you can switch between your kind of locked down kiosk state and more of a traditional Windows desktop experience. So I'm gonna walk through this new profile one. Here we have a set of configurations that we can choose. You can uncheck and check these at will. We're just gonna check them all for now, just so we can talk about them, and then after we'll apply a profile. So auto login is exactly what it sounds like. You're making sure the device logs in with the user account that you specify here, instead of sitting at the control delete screen. These can be domain or local user accounts, completely up to you. But pretty straightforward there. The password is stored in the LSA secure store on the remote device, so it's not going to be in plain text in the registry or anything like that. The next screen is where I think this gets particularly interesting. We have replace shell. This is basically replacing the Windows desktop experience, right? Our start menu goes away, all of that, and instead we're left with one or more applications that launch on startup. So we can kind of cherry pick the apps that the users see and not give them access to launch other applications. And we have a couple of default apps in the list, right? We have some web browsers. We have a generic Win32 app. I'll talk about Chrome and Win32 app. All the web browsers are kind of the same. But Chrome, we specify the path to the Chrome executable. You can change that if you need to, but we've chosen the default install path. You can specify a launch URL. So this is the URL that Chrome launches into. So when the app launches, it'll go to the recastsoftware.com homepage. I can choose to launch the web browser in kiosk mode, which is basically a full screen mode that gets rid of all window decorations, gets rid of the URL bar, and makes it seem like the web app is kind of more like a phone web app or a platform web app type of thing. It's a full screen experience for the browser. We have a private mode option that lets you not save any session state. Right? This is like incognito mode, and this is kind of about protecting your users, right? If your user happens to sign into their banking their banking account or their email account and forgets to sign out before they walk away from the kiosk, the private mode will at least give you a means to wipe it on reboot. So if the session reboots, they can be relatively safe in the fact that their login credentials weren't cached on that shared auto login account. And then we have a couple of generic launch options. So we have a delay option for all applications that launch via our Recast shell. This lets you prevent the application from launching before, say, DHCP is finished. Some apps are network aware, like Google Chrome, so we default that to 0, but others, like Firefox, will not react to changes in network state. So, I think we set it to 200 or something by default, but you can kind of set it to what your network needs. We allow you to set the window style. This is kind of overridden by kiosk mode in some of the web browsers, but this is maximized. It's kind of this full screen mode, or the maximized window mode that you see in the console behind the window. Normal is just the normal launch, or minimized or hidden. I don't see why you would use too often, but we included it in there because it's easy. And then you can choose what happens when the application closes. So this could be the user closed the application, or this could be the application crashed for whatever reason. You can either have it do nothing, so we'll just ignore it and move and let the state continue as is. We can try to relaunch the app with the same set of parameters that you've provided, or we can just go ahead and reboot the computer or shut it down if you want. It's completely up to you. The next option is this Win32 application. This is where I think things get kind of interesting, because it's we're not limiting you to just the web browsers. You can launch any old executable you want and specify any command line arguments you want. We see this often in K through 12s when they're preparing for state testing. Although who knows this year what state testing will look like, where they'll have some custom lockdown browser that they specify in the path here. And if it takes arguments, they'll specify them, although a lot of them don't even need arguments these days. And then specify the launch conditions. So it's a pretty popular option in state testing. Although if you have 4Winds digital signage, you could use it for that too, I suppose. Restart on idle is, what happens if the user walks away? Common in like library scenarios or public classroom or public lab scenarios where the user might be signing in with their own account. What do you want to have happen when they walk away and forget to sign out? This lets them, instead of like locking the screen, this will let it just reboot and kind of wipe all the session state. And the nice thing about this is it kind of ties into some of the other options, right? So you can have the device delete files and folders on restart, right? So you can either choose some auto login place locations, or you can specify your own custom path here as well. And again, this is somewhat about protecting the user, somewhat about cleaning up the device after the user. We do have a better option for this in the unified write filter that we'll talk a little bit about later. But this is an option for those devices that maybe aren't unified write filter enabled. You can try to wipe some of those locations this way as well.
Jeff Necker, I see your hand up. Do you have a question here?
You probably will get to it in a minute, but I'm just wondering, what if that application or that URL requires some kind of a PIN or an authentication?
Yeah, I mean, good question. So we're not doing anything special. Like it's basically process.start is what we're doing. So if there's any extra authentication for launching that app, it would require the user interact with it in order to do that. Great question.
Thank you.
Unless it uses Windows auth and depending on if they're using auto launch or whatever, it could presumably authenticate that way if it's in like trusted sites or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point too. If you've specified the trusted sites list and allowed intranet applications to sign in automatically with your Windows auth. I think Chrome will do it by default. Yeah, great question. So we're on the internet URL allow list. This lets you specify a list of websites that will work, and the idea is anything outside of this list will not work. We have a custom profile or a Pearson profile. Again, this was kind of designed around K through 12 state testing. So we'll let you easily add all of the Pearson stuff, but you can specify your own URLs, right? If I chose recastsoftware.com as my launch URL, I can add that to the allow list here as well. You can disable specific keyboard keys. So, when the user tries to use these keys, they just won't work. We have a list of keys here. Here we've disabled left alt, right alt, so they, try to disable alt tab or control alt delete or that kind of thing. But kind of up to you what you want to do here. And then finally, you can configure the audio volume, right? So if you're a public library, public computer lab, maybe you want that all the way down. But if you're trying to catch people's attention, digital signage or something, you'd pump it up, maybe get annoying for the users, but it's up to you. All right, so that's all the profile settings. So what does applying a profile look like? So for that, I'm going to come into Kiosk Manager, apply profile, and I'm going to choose this kiosk demo one and hit next. And we get a couple of options when we're applying and removing profiles. So we can either tell it to go ahead and deploy this right now, or we can schedule it for sometime in the future. So if we have like a public computer lab type of scenario where we need to prepare things for training at a certain time, we can go ahead and deploy the kiosk profile at that time, and then roll it back after that training session is over. Again, this is a common thing for K through 12 state testing for some of our customers, where they'll kind of schedule the deployment, schedule the removal, and go back and forth between the more kiosk style device and back to the full Windows 10 desktop experience. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy this to Kiosk 02, and I'm going to pop over to Hyper-V Box. So this is Kiosk 02. We should see it reboot in a minute. And when it reboots, it'll auto log in with that test user account. And it should launch into a full screen web browser to the recastsoftware.com homepage. So I have a question about does the kiosk feature add a provisioning package, or is it all UWF? So the kiosk manager doesn't use provisioning packages. It actually has some executables that get deployed to the device. So one is our Recast shell that's responsible for launching the applications and monitoring their state. We have a configuration executable that gets copied down as well to help with writing to the LSA store and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's all done via remote WMI, remote registry, or remote file system. If you have Recast agents or some of those things, you don't need the remote stuff enabled, right? You don't need remote WMI registry or file system. It'll just happen over that communications channel. So we see here, as I said, it logged in with test user, it launched the Recast software homepage. It's in kiosk mode, so I can't, I don't have some of the window decorations or anything like that, or the URL bar. If I hit Control Alt Delete here, I've actually disabled the left and right Alt keys, so nothing happens. So pretty straightforward there. The next thing I'm going to show is just rolling that back real quick, because it is really easy to just go back and forth between that lockdown and that full Windows 10 experience. So I'm going to right click to remove profile. And again, we can schedule it for the future, or we can just do it now. I'm going to do it now. It'll kick off the reboot, and when it comes back, it'll be back at that login screen. So there it goes. The next, and then the last logged in user was that test user account. The next thing we're going to show is kind of related to kiosk, and that's our unified write filter tool set. For those of you who aren't familiar, unified write filter is a Windows 10 feature. It was actually introduced in, I want to say, Windows 8 embedded. And before Windows 8 embedded, it was known as the file system filter and the registry filter. But at some point down the line, they combined them into the unified write filter. And the idea behind it is that you take your devices and you kind of lock them into a known good state. So you're taking a known good device and saying, well, any future writes to disk or writes to registry are going to be discarded on reboot. So what the Windows device does is it intercepts any writes to disk, writes to registry, redirects them to a special layer in the operating system that it's just temporary. It's wiped on every reboot, which can be handy, right? You're always a reboot away from hopefully fixing a configuration issue that maybe a user introduced. Our unified write filter tools are all about helping you configure some of those unified write filter settings. So it's the same idea as Kiosk Manager. We have a bundle of settings inside of a unified write filter profile. And our settings are really about where you're storing that temporary data. Down here at the bottom, we have these cache options. You can either store it in memory on the device, or by default, we store it to disk, where you're reserving a section of the disk and redirecting all writes to that section. Up here at the top, we have a list of exclusions, and these, wiping all changes on reboot is great in theory, but in reality, that has a tendency to break a lot of things, right? If your domain joins, how are you going to save your machine account password changes? Eventually you might lose that trust relationship with the domain. Or if you have a config client, right? How are you going to make sure your data isn't kind of reset on every reboot, right? How is WMI going to behave if everything is reset on reboot? So we have a couple of common exclusion sets to try to help you configure that. One for the config client, Windows Defender, and Windows, and then we have a couple of third-party exclusions that we configure as well. And when you add those, it adds a bunch of file and registry exclusions that we're going to allow not to be redirected to that temporary layer. So these will persist across reboots, writes to these locations. And if you want, you can add your own file system or registry area as well. I actually have the unified write filter applied to this device. So I'm going to open up unified write filter status. And this tool lets us view the current state of the unified write filter on a device. Here we can see, if the feature is enabled and the filter is enabled, we can see a set of exclusions applied to the device, as well as the some of the disk and or the overlay type, as well as the maximum size on the overlay. And so to kind of demonstrate this, I'm going to just open the $C share on this, and I'm going to write a file to Marty's desktop here. And then we'll reboot it and kind of see what happens. It should just wipe the file on reboot here. And the cool thing about the unified write filter is that the config manager client is completely write filter aware. You've probably seen it as you're going through your deployment wizards. It says something like what to do with write filter enabled devices. You can either have it wipe immediately or apply changes immediately or wait for a maintenance window. And that's kind of unique in these state lockdown scenarios where other state lockdown tools might not have that capability, where in config manager you have to actually tell it, well, before you make this change, I want you to thaw the device or unlock the device, make the config manager change, and then re-enable that thawed or that frozen state. So config manager clients fully write filter aware. I'll talk more about that in a bit, but you'll notice the text file is gone after the reboot, right? So we rebooted the device after writing the text file, it disappeared. So it's a really good way to make sure your users aren't making unapproved changes to your system. So I mentioned the write filter aware thing. I'm just going to come to a deployment real quick, talk through some of that. I never remember where it is, so bear with me a minute. So here we go. The user experience tab has this write filter handling for Windows embedded devices. If you check this box, what'll happen is at the deadline time for that update, for that deployment, the device will actually reboot into unified write filter servicing mode, which basically means only local admins can log into the device and make changes to it. And while it's in that servicing mode, it's sitting there applying whatever deployments that your config manager deployment has, or whatever deployments you've deployed in config manager. And then once it's done with all of the config man deployments, it'll reboot back into that lockdown state. So you don't have to worry about any more complex orchestration. You can either just check that box and let the config man client handle it, or you can set up maintenance windows, and the client is aware that, all right, I'm in a maintenance window, I have the unified write filter applied, I'm going to reboot while I'm in that maintenance window to an unlocked state and start applying the same settings and reboot back into the lock state. So you get a couple of options for handling write filters inside the config man console. The last bit I'm going to show is our right-click tool builder platform. And this platform is, again, all about solving your organization-specific problems, right? So, think of the scenarios where you're getting tickets escalated from the service desk, and you just want to provide easy buttons for them. That's kind of where this was built, or why this type of tool was built. And the idea behind it is, you just make a kind of a workflow inside a builder here, and we give you access to all of the back-end right-click tool actions that we use inside of the right-click tools to run our actions. So it's all the same stuff that you're using when you use the right-click tools, but the difference is we've kind of componentized them and let you kind of specify the flow of when these actions get called. And so I'm gonna walk through this kind of fixed encryption method example that we built out. The scenario here is, I've reimaged maybe a bunch of devices, and I've forgotten to set my Bitlocker encryption method during the task sequence. And so now I've got a bunch of devices roaming around with AES 128, and I just want to allow my service desk to quickly fix those when a user has scheduled some time with them. And so, here we've set up this flow to stop the MBAM service, decrypt the C drive, and then we run a PowerShell script to kind of wait for the decryption process to finish. We override that default BitLocker encryption method via registry value. We add the key protectors that are relevant for our organization, and then we go ahead and encrypt the device. So, the nice thing about this is, we have a lot of complicated steps kind of bundled into a single action, and all of these actions are permissioned on the Recast management server. So, I can give certain users access to certain builder actions, and the nice thing about it is they don't even need access to these internal components. They don't need to have permission to add BitLocker keys or that kind of thing. They're only given access to the flow that I've defined inside of Recast, inside of RCT Builder. And so what does that look like? I want to choose a device that's offline because I don't really want to re-encrypt. But I come into Runner. So you build things in Builder, you run them in Runner, and it's the same exact user experience as Kiosk Manager and Unified Write Filter. You have a list of things, you pick the one that's relevant, and then you hit next, and you can either schedule it for running in the future, or you can run it right now. And when you run it right now, the UI you get kind of changes depending on some of the settings inside of Builder. But here we've chosen a tabbed interface where each tab kind of shows some independent data. This is going to fail. I intentionally chose a device that's offline. So in a minute we'll get some failure results here. And yeah, that's RCT Builder and RCT Runner. We're always looking to improve this. Actions are added with every release. So even if we don't spend time on the Builder and Runner UIs, this list on the right is always growing. So you can expect to see more and more added there as time goes on. So that concludes the enterprise walkthrough. Feel free to ask any questions you have. Mark and I will try to answer them.
Let's see.
Mark, that sounds like a you question.
Does this allow you to switch to full volume encryption, for example, and then behind the scenes will decrypt, enable full volume rate? Yeah, so you could do it that way. Similar to that thing, the encrypt step itself, I believe, has there's like a Boolean flag on it, so you'd have to say I think it's use space only, true or false. So if you want full volume versus use space only, you'd set that to false, I guess, and that should go ahead and re-encrypt it as full encryption. Assuming, of course, it's a full encryption capable device. All of ours are use space only because they're all VMs, and you can't. You have to use space only on VMs. Or I'm sorry, I might be confusing the two. But anyways, that's a little unrelated, I suppose. No, there wasn't. This is all our stuff, and it's all doing it through. There's like a Win32 encryptable volume WMI class that on the back end it's all going through. So we're just doing it that way. It's like our GUI, I guess, to access it.
Yeah, that's kind of the nice thing about Builder here is we provide a light GUI. I mean, it's not always the best looking GUI because we're kind of automating it based on some of the input parameters of our actions, but we do actually provide a GUI for each of the input parameters for each action. So it can kind of lower the bar for that as well. For those of you who maybe haven't downloaded the tools in a while, I just want to point out that 4.3 is our newest version. So definitely upgrade if you're on an older release, and we're probably going to be releasing 4.4 in a month. So probably at the end of this month and do the typical webinar thing sometime in October.
Yeah, we have quarterly meetings, and we can look at some breakdowns for anyone who has analytics enabled, and it reports like versioning, and we still have a surprising amount of people still on 3.2, which as of right now is almost 3 years old or something like that, Chris? Is that right?
Yeah, it's pretty ancient. And it's it's on a stack that with 4.0 we really re-architected the stack quite a bit. It's quickly becoming a forgotten stack, I would say. Where I've forgotten way more about 3.2 and how it works than I care to admit. But so definitely upgrade to 4.0 or later.
4.0 gives you so many better methods as well. Like Chris mentioned about, you can run a proxy as a service count or more proxies as multiple service counts. You can have like our agent on the device, scopes and permissions and all other fun stuff that just gives you the more complexity that you might need in your environment, as along with the additional security of, instead of just running as the user logging into the console, it can run as whatever you need it to, essentially.
Yeah, and there's, even if you're a community user, there's a fair amount of improvements there. We did a test recently where we're hitting 100,000 devices or so, and I did a similar test in like October of 2016, and it took maybe 13 minutes to run an action against 100,000 devices back then. We did the same test and it was like in 5 minutes or so. So there's just overall improvements always going into the new versions. So it's valuable to stay up to date, and you get some new features as well. We have a new software updates UI, some new system info stuff. Yeah, good question about Recast server. So the Recast server gets you the ability to control permissions and scopes inside of the right-click tool. So you can say, well, this user can run these actions against these devices. But to what Mark was talking about, the real power of it is letting you hit untrusted domains, hit devices that are not joined to your domain, not require local admin permissions on the remote device when you're running the right-click tools, or require any remote firewall exceptions on the devices either. There's a lot of flexibility you get when you introduce Recast Management Server. In 4.4, you'll also get some web dashboards for Recast Management Server. So you can, all of those in-console dashboards that I was showing, part of the problem with them is you can't share them with your manager. In 4.4, you'll be able to just generate a URL on Recast Management Server and send it over to them.
What, you don't have the console on your manager's machine?
Yeah, it turns out not everyone in the org has the console. It's weird. Everyone in our org has the console.
I just put it in the whim, Edward mentioned logging too. Yeah, we have the management server has an audit log. It'll also write some of that audit logging data to a custom event log. So if you want to collect it with like SCOM or one of your other event management services, you can do that too and consume it that way.
Yeah, so here's the audit log. Also in 4.4, this entire UI is redesigned, so it'll look a little better. But yeah, it's cool because here I'm evaluating devices in an untrusted domain, right? If I wanted, I could like run actions against them, or run permissioned actions. Like I can run actions against devices untrusted domain, even though my account would not have permission to do that. So there's quite a bit there that you can do, right? We have the Recast agent thing that we talked about, where now I don't need permissions on these remote devices. If I don't want, I can just run the action. It'll run as local system.
If Nystrom were still here, he'd be so happy because then he wouldn't have to be giving away. You wouldn't need all the administrative permissions on them.
Yeah, all of our VMs are encrypted too, which is nice. You would have liked that.
That he would not have liked. To be fair, the ones I set up are encrypted.
Well, yeah, most of them are, I think. Maybe not.
We have to look back at them. Worst case, a couple of quick policy changes, I can fix that. No, actually, I can't. I think I have to make sure. I think I set up the policy for it, but some people who are creating VMs did not enable virtual TPM, so it won't work. Or if you use if someone didn't eject the disk, if you have like a virtual disk mounted, you cannot enable a TPM key protector until you eject that thing. It's kind of a goofy little quirk, but
That's right. Makes for a more interesting demo.
yes.
Well, we don't have much more to talk about. Greg, if you want to take it back.
Okay.
Stick around for questions for a little bit here if something comes up, but I think they're kind of slowing down.
Yeah.
Oh, one last thing to mention. If you have any feature requests, community or enterprise, we have a feature request board similar to user voice. If you just go to our website and click on, Chris is going to bring it up real quick. I always forget to mention this thing. But
great idea.
yeah, so you can submit feature requests, vote them up and down. And we try to get like 2 or 3 of these per quarter done. So the more votes they have, the more likely we are to get it done if it's possible.
Yep, absolutely.
Very nice. All right, guys. Well, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it.